Hey, what's going on, everybody? My name is Corey, better known as the Seaman, and I want to welcome you to another edition of the Seaman's Cinema. Sit down if you've been following along in my shorts here on YouTube or over on Instagram or TikTok. I have a feeling you probably know what we're getting ready to get into because I haven't had a chance to sit down and talk about this one yet. If you're looking at my attire, you probably know what we're getting ready to jump into, and if you've read the title of this video, you obviously know what we're getting into. So let's not waste any time, man. Why don't you pull up a chair, take a seat. We are getting ready to dive in spoiler-free into Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, and man, oh man, what an emotional roller coaster of a journey I got to experience this movie in by going to the IMAX trilogy screening. They did a little marathon on Wednesday, started about 7 o'clock, ran till about 2:30 with Volume 3 dropping at midnight. So it felt like a midnight screening, just not with a midnight screening audience. My theater is probably about half full. 8 hours, I guess, is a long commitment. That doesn't seem long when you've done the entire MCU, and you're just doing 3 movies here. But watching all 3 of these movies back to back to back was spectacular. I mean, for me, seeing them all in IMAX, especially because I hadn't seen the first 2 since they had originally come out in IMAX, and then getting to see this final chapter on the back end of that, really solidified for me that this is one of the greatest trilogies, I think, of all time. I got some of my movie buddies at work ruffled their feathers a little bit. They were like, yo, you can't tell me Guardians of the Galaxy is better than The Godfather. And I'm like, well, Godfather Part 3 does exist, and, like, it's an okay movie, but it's not, like, at the same level and quality as the first 2. And there are lots of trilogies that have an entry like that. For me, there are only 2 that I really ever go to that I think are perfect. The original Star Wars trilogy, and then the Indiana Jones trilogy. And those, of course, are 2 trilogies I watched all the time on Saturday and Sunday mornings when I was growing up. But those, like, every single time I go to one of those movies, I get the same enjoyment level in each and every one of them. I can pick up with them anywhere in a movie and just watch it and can watch all of them from there. Do it in order, do it not in order. And that's how I feel about Guardians. And the thing that I think is most apparent here is the quality level. There is no drop. I mean, Gunn just gives you phenomenal all the way across. And you get to this one, and for me, I think it's the best in the franchise because it's a more emotional story and a more personal story for these Guardians. And that's funny to say, considering I think all of these movies are kind of personal for individual Guardians at any given time, but this movie is personal for all the Guardians. And that is what I think elevates this one above the others. You throw in what Gunn does from character development and how he, one, is able to juggle all the characters he has. That's the other thing. Watching these 3 movies in a row, seeing the growth of James Gunn as a filmmaker is so apparent. I mean, just the way that he does what he does in the first one, expands on that and enhances it in the second one. And while you don't necessarily have a ton of new characters being introduced this time, really it's just the High Evolutionary and Adam Warlock, the newer characters that have come in, because Gunn understands how to juggle all those stories and what through lines are most important and how you can bring them all together, everybody gets some legit stuff this time around. And I just, like, I sit there and I go, this is a guy operating at like peak performance, and like this is some of the best stuff that he's done. And to have a satisfying conclusion and journey for every single one of these characters is really quite a magic trick, and to pull it off so seamlessly and juggle the amount that he juggles here, I think is really excellent. And one of the things that I've seen some people knock the Guardians movies for, and superhero Marvel movies in general, are the villains. And I personally think that's one of the special little ingredients in what Gunn is cooking up, because he doesn't necessarily spend a ton of time on his villains, and there really isn't necessarily a ton of character development around his villains, because he spends that time where we should be spending that time, and that's with their characters. And like I said, when you get to this movie, you really can appreciate the fact that we've gotten the amount of time that we've gotten with these characters in just these 3 Guardians movies, plus the Avengers movies, plus the Christmas special. But like you're just, because you spend so much time with all of them and that's your focus, every movie and every entry and every piece is satisfying to those characters. And then the villains, they're terrifying, and Gunn makes them terrifying in really quick ways and with just surface value. And he allows his actors to bring depth to the very little that these characters have. I mean, rewatching one, Lee Pace, like, he just pops so much harder. And I get that with the villain here. You know, the High Evolutionary is someone that doesn't need to be on screen all the time to understand how terrifying and how evil he is. And that's the thing that Gunn really drills down this time. And I love seeing Gunn get to go back to his horror roots a little bit around High Evolutionary stuff, because this is one of the darkest movies I think we've ever gotten in Marvel. And the subject matter that Gunn is tackling in this one is heavy, is dark. Sometimes it's disturbing. And that's balanced quite well with the levity and the light of this movie. But when you're in those places, you know, Gunn doesn't let any of that be wasted. And every decision he makes is so poignant and so, you know, specific to what it means to the story. Everything just drives other factors, and you really are quite scared of what's going on. And knowing that ties back to Rocket makes this movie unbelievably personal to this group. And I just think that Gunn handles that on the writing side exquisitely, and then takes that concept and that feeling that goes with that. Take what we've gotten in the trailers, and you have an audience member like me walking into this going, especially after watching the first two right before it, going, I'm nervous. I'm nervous for my characters. Like, it seems like we're in peril. Like, it seems like people are in mortal danger in this one. And that puts you on edge and puts you in an emotional space for the whole movie that I think Gunn uses to his advantage. I enjoyed this movie. I laugh. There were tears, obviously. But, like, the feeling of at any time something really bad could happen exists the whole movie. And that really creates an energy that drives this thing and makes the things that Gunn is trying to do so important, and just kind of gives it an exclamation point on anything that he is doing. And I love what we're looking at from a hero's perspective in this movie. Like, you have this darkness going on, but on the hero side, it's like, how far are you willing to go to protect your people, to avenge somebody? And watching each of the characters kind of juggle that and see the lengths to where they go, I mean, this is probably the most mature movie in the MCU. And I don't mean it's rated R material, although Gunn definitely pushes that line. This pushes it. But it's one of those where it's like the subject matter and the maturity of the characters and of the writing is so present that, like, you feel like you're watching an adult movie. And yes, you can take kids to this, although I would caution, like, there's some dark, heavy stuff in here, but this is just Gunn operating at the peak across the board, and then you throw in what he does behind the camera, and it's magical, man. The way he moves the camera, specifically through action and emotion. Like, how he uses the camera, it amps all the action moments. Some of the best Guardians action is in this movie. The visual effects are stellar. But then those emotional moments, they hit super hard because of how Gunn can bring you in and get you close to these characters. And because we've spent so much time, all the emotional beats just hit, and they're you know, the punctuation on everything that Gunn is doing. And that was just a lot of fun to watch. And yeah, I think he's probably operating at some of the best he's ever done as a filmmaker. And for me, this is my favorite Guardians movie. And it really does stem not just because of what Gunn is doing, but what he does and gives this cast. And this cast, starting with Chris Pratt, is just absolutely phenomenal, man. I mean, we didn't know the kind of hero we were getting with the chubby, funny guy from Parks and Rec. And Chris Pratt has created somebody with this version of Peter Quill that, like, you just are always rooting for this guy. You always understand this guy. And this guy is maybe the most human. For somebody who didn't get to live on Earth, he maybe is the most human character in the MCU. And watching him make human decisions in this movie and how what's going on around him is impacting him and affecting him, on top of, like, the stuff that he's dealing with Gamora and this version of her that exists that isn't his Gamora, Pratt's just excellent. When you're talking about Gamora, I don't think we always give Zoe Saldana the best material to work with, specifically in this franchise. I mean, she's been Quill's love interest. We haven't necessarily even seen that fully consummate, you know, per se. But, like, what Gunn gives her this time, I think, has so much more depth to it because Quill wants her to be one thing, but she's something completely different because of where she got plucked in the timeline. And it creates some really interesting places for her. A lot of it is anger-driven, but in the third act and toward the back end of this movie, watching shifts and how Gamora responds to things with the Guardians, I think is really cool and interesting, and gives you this kind of idea that, like, yeah, even in a world with multiple universes, there are some things that are just always there. You just have to find them and figure out how to find them. And how they explore that kind of stuff, I thought really gave Saldana some stuff that she hasn't really gotten to have in these movies where she's got all this crazy amounts of makeup on. And she really reminds you how good of an actor she is and how great she is in the action set pieces. Like, we get some really dope Gamora stuff. And when it comes to the action and what Gunn's building, I said this in my shorts, there's a sequence in a hallway that utilizes everybody. Is one of the most well-executed sequences of action for a team I've seen in my life. And everybody gets some of that. But, like, the Gamora stuff definitely really, really hits for me. Look, this guy right here on my hat, probably my favorite character in the MCU. So much of that is because of Sean Gunn's wonderful, motion capture and performance capture. But then obviously it's Bradley Cooper's voice performance and James Gunn's writing of the character. Rocket Raccoon is my favorite thing in this franchise, has been since the first movie, and the minute he showed up, he became my favorite thing in the MCU. And to finally see a character whose story is kind of just on, like, right attached to Quill's and right underneath it. Like, Quill is our, main pathway in, but Rocket's story is kind of like the main story too, in parallel. It's just kind of hidden, and it's not hidden here. And what you get from Sean Gunn performance-wise, mixed with what you get from Bradley Cooper voice-wise, and you get a little bit of Sean Gunn voice performance in here. He voices the younger Rocket when we do the flashbacks. But what those two guys together bring for this character, oh man, I mean, dead center of everything that's going on in this movie. Everything is revolving around Rocket, and we kind of got that vibe in the trailers. And where the character has to go, both from an emotional standpoint and starting to understand what he has carried with him for all of these movies and forever, and how he became who he is, and what that ultimately means to him and his decision making. He has got a hero's journey in this one that's just really, really cool. And I was just so satisfying to have Rocket be the front and center, when for me he's always kind of felt like the front and center, even though it's like Quill is what we're physically seeing front and center. And what Cooper and Gunn bring is just top notch and some of the best stuff that they've done. And the tone setter for the movie is the opening, which, that opening song is the tone setter of every single one of these. And this one follows Rocket, and it's got a little bit of a different vibe, but it definitely sets the tone for what this movie is and where you're gonna go, both emotionally and physically. And then when you're looking at the rest of the group, I mean, Mantis was such a genius add into. They've used her spectacularly since then. This is her best performance in the MCU. Pom Klementieff is at her absolute best. And what's going on with her and Quill being related, and everything else that's happening, like how she is not only concerned for the Guardians' mission, but also for things that are happening with Quill personally because of the Gamora stuff. I really, really enjoyed watching her kind of work through and flush that stuff out. And then the thing that I fell in love with the Guardians special was the pair-up of her and Drax, and that is so enjoyable here, and has, again, a lot of depth to it. And you go to places that I think are really interesting, and Klementieff is just excellent. I love Dave Bautista. I mean, he's a phenomenal actor in general, but James Gunn really found what makes him special. And I think that let Dave Bautista know that he was special. And now he's taken that and really grown as an actor. And what we get with Drax here is it's always fun. I mean, Drax is always fun because of just what his nature is and the way things go over his head. But how he handles emotional weight in this movie is fascinating. And we've seen it from him before, specifically when he's talking about his family. And like I said, this one being more personal to the Guardians, it allows Bautista to go to some emotional places, specifically with Mantis, and with Nebula. There's a lot of good back and forth with him and Nebula, and I love what they do with the character and the stuff that they look into. And the ultimate arc for Drax really hits, and Bautista just nails it, especially from the emotional standpoint. We get some of the most emotional acting from Bautista that we get, but some of his humor, some of the funniest too. And then maybe the like one of the best things when it comes to additions or just things that have been there and have grown since the first Guardians, Nebula Karen Gillen. Holy cow, man. The utilization of this character post-Endgame makes her one of the most important characters in the entire MCU. And performance-wise, she has given you some of the best stuff in the MCU. I love what they do with Nebula in this movie, specifically because of her relationship to Rocket and her relationship to Gamora. It centers her right in the middle of the two biggest storylines in the film. You know, the stuff with Quill and Gamora, Nebula's smack dab in the middle of, and everything that's going on with the High Evolutionary and Rocket. Because of how close she is to Rocket, puts her smack dab in the middle there. And I love what you get performance-wise from Gillen, especially, again, emotionally, because Nebula is so robotic at this point, the emotions are hard to come by. And when she gets pure emotional moments, they really, really shine. And there's a couple of them that just bring smiles to your face, which doesn't happen a lot for Nebula. And then, physically, the way they've just turned her into a ragdoll that can break and then fix herself up, it's so cool in this movie, and the way that she delivers it and how it looks visually, I mean, you got really creative with some of the action because of things you can do unnaturally with Nebula that really, really make that stuff pop. And then, of course, the heart and soul of the Guardians. Good old Groot. I mean, Baby Groot, still to this day, one of the greatest things ever introduced into mainstream media. But what Vin Diesel can do with just 3 words, I am Groot, is amazing. And the depth of that is crazy. And I love how they utilize Groot in this movie. I love how they kind of address the language barrier because Gamora doesn't know how to speak to Groot. And how all of that works throughout the course of the movie hits in the comedy, hits in the emotional areas. The action with Groot this time around is phenomenal. And I tell you, the size of Groot, it serves a purpose. And when you get to see like why he's this big this time around, some of the funnest adult Groot stuff we've ever gotten, and the way he works into the action. There's a set piece with him and Quill, so cool. And like I said, just where Gunn is willing to take these characters and where these actors are willing to go and try to figure out for these characters in this movie is so fascinating to watch. And then when you talk about additions, Maria Bakalova, who comes in to voice Cosmo here. Fantastic. Always been in the background. Love getting to see Cosmo be a real character. Small, but what she brings for Cosmo is cool. And how they use Cosmo really allows the audience, I think, to finally understand who this character is. And they pair her with Gunn and Kraglin, which is great. It is so cool to see Kraglin get a real story and one that really pays off. And the relationship between him and Cosmo, if you're a dog owner, you're going to feel very simpatico about it. It maybe goes on a little bit too long, but we've all been there. And I think the responses specifically from Bakalova with Cosmo and Kraglin is just great. And like I said, ultimately where we go with Kraglin is really cool. But then other additions, if we go back to the Sovereigns, yes, Ayesha is back. Elizabeth Debicki, she's great, love her. But the addition coming from the Sovereign, of course, is Adam Warlock. And Will Poulter's performance, fantastic, man. Totally not what I was expecting, but I also wasn't sure what I was expecting because there's no Infinity Stones in play in this movie, and that's really where Warlock comes in the biggest. So how they utilize him, I thought worked perfectly for this movie. I thought Poulter's execution was great. He's scary, but he's also funny. And the action around Warlock is awesome and is very, very, very encouraging if you were a James Gunn DC Superman fan. I think what we're going to get with Gunn and Superman, when you look at this trilogy and what he can do in the superhero world, and when you see what he can do with the action that you get with Adam Warlock, oh man, it's going to hit and it's going to be glorious. And if Will Poulter is not used as Adam Warlock anymore after this movie, or not used for some time, I say make his hair dark and hey, Jimmy Gunn, bring him over. I think Will Poulter would be an excellent Superman. He'd be a phenomenal Clark Kent for sure, but I think he'd be a great Superman, and he shows that in this movie with some of the stuff that he's able to do. But the biggest ad, and the one that hits the hardest for me, is Chukwudi Iwuji, who of course comes from Peacemaker, and he's the High Evolutionary, and this character is so integral to the Rocket storyline that James Gunn is able to use this kind of, like I was saying, that like you don't necessarily have to dive a ton into the villain to make the villain work. And being tied to Rocket's backstory, seeing things that he is involved with without him physically always having to be there, really amps up the kind of bad that this guy is. And then where Iwuji takes the character, there's a lot of stuff, a lot of things probably reading between the lines that he gives performance-wise that informs us a lot about this character. And he is truly one of the most terrifying and darkest characters I think that we've seen. I mean, the things that Gunn's hitting on in that part of the story, like I said, that's our darkness, and it's heavy. And Iwuji's performance completely matches it, and just going through that whole story is such a crazy, awesome roller coaster. And yeah, this whole franchise is a crazy, awesome roller coaster. And I loved every second of Volume 3. I think it's the perfect cap to this trilogy, and I think we should give it a score. So let's get the C-Maniacs up. Like I said, Gunn is at his best here. His writing is phenomenal. His action is stellar. The visual effects are on point. It's one of the best soundtracks that we've gotten in any of the movies, and specifically because of what plays during the credits, which stick around. There's 2 post-credit scenes. One you'll get right at the top, and then the other all the way at the end of the credits. But while the credits are playing, you're kind of getting some nice nods to the overall trilogy, and the music choices for those 2 stretches are so much fun. Especially the second one. The second one hit for me personally, where I was like, oh, I love it. But yeah, I mean, everything that Gunn is doing here is, I think, the best of his career to this point. Performance-wise, I mean, everybody is stellar. Specifically, Pratt, Cooper, Sean Gunn, because he's tied to Rocket Raccoon, Iwuji, and Gillen and Pom Klementieff. I mean, just really, really, really great stuff for all of the characters and everybody that's here. I mean, Bautista and Vin Diesel and Groot and Drax, like everybody that's here gets something. Every story is completely satisfying, and this is, like I said, the perfect cap to this trilogy. And I think this is a top 10 guaranteed, and it's probably in my top 5 if I'm thinking about it right now. I've seen it twice, and my love for it just grows with each watch. It was an emotional roller coaster of a journey, and one that I was glad I went on, and I'm going 5 out of 5 C-Maniacs. You knew we were going there. I mean, come on, man. This is the best movie of the year, and it might be hard to dethrone this. I mean, Dune Part 2 might be up to the task, but this sets a high bar, and a much higher bar, I think, for any Guardians movie. This hits in a way where, like, this is a movie that, like, is more than just a superhero movie, but it's also, like, the most comic booky stuff that we've gotten in the MCU. Like, going down the path of the High Evolutionary and Counter-Earth and all that stuff, like, it's a big swing, but it works because we live in a world where comic book movies are all over the place, and James Gunn does the comic booky stuff, I think, better than anybody. So 5 out of 5 for me. I'm going to shut up because I've been talking way too long. Now I want to know what you're thinking. How much did you love Guardians of the Galaxy as a trilogy? If you've seen the 3rd volume, how do you think it fits in the trilogy? What did you think of the volume in and of itself? And, you know, where does this put you in overall trilogies? And if you haven't seen the movie, when are you seeing it? We got a big potential box office this weekend. We're projecting 240, I think was the last number I saw. So it seems like lots of people are going to see it this weekend. So if you haven't, when are you going to see it? If you're not going to go to the theater, are you going to wait for DVD? Or DVD for digital release, not in the we're not in the 2000s, Corey, early 2000s, but you gotta wait for digital. You gotta wait for streaming. Disney Plus will be a little bit longer than digital. What's your game plan? What are you looking forward to? Are you nervous about this one? And what kind of ride do you hope to get out of it? Anything you got, man, whether you've seen it or not, good, bad, indifferent, on Guardians of the Galaxy, the trilogy, and Volume 3 specifically, put it down below in the comment section. Look forward to talking to you down there. As always, if you enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up. And if you're new, you want to come hang out with the C-Man anytime we're talking movies, TV, trailer, reactions, you want to just show a little love and support because you dig my vibe and the things I got to say. And hey, my birthday's coming up, so maybe you want to give me a little birthday gift. It's next Sunday, May 7th, so we're only a couple days next Sunday. We're 2 days away from my birthday. You want to give me a birthday gift? Hey, come join C-Maniac Nation. You can literally do all of those things with that. And you can do that by jumping over there, hitting that subscribe button, hit that little bell if you want those alerts. And until next time, for the C-Man's Cinema, sit down. I've been the C-Man. Thank you for taking this ride with me, man. This journey in this movie hit personally for me. I was glad to talk to you about it, and I appreciate anyone that came for the whole ride. But until next time, I've been the C-Man. I'm signing off. Peace! Oh, you guys are still here. You snuck up on me. You must be looking for more of this guy. Well, I got 2 video options for you, man. Right up here and right over here. And if you want all those C-Man goodies, well, hey, come join the squad right on over there, and I'll catch you on the next one.